So, racing games. They're fun and fast and quite entertaining. They're also basically dead. Don't get me wrong, I love racing, and there's quite a few games being released every single year, but in contrast to the juggernauts of modern gaming, racing games are dead and buried. Racing genre gets almost no hype, doesn't get $100 million development and marketing campaigns, gets no massive crowds at game shows, and doesn't have a player base numbering in the tens of millions. Games like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, League of Legends, or Counter-Strike get several $100 million budgets just for their development and double or triple that for marketing. Every year, there are events happening across the world that attract millions of fans to stadiums and tens of millions of viewers towards streaming platforms. League's Worlds, or CS2 majors, are easily equivalent in scale and public exposure to traditional sporting events like the Super Bowl or FIFA World Cup. In 2018, League of Legends Worlds has been watched by almost 100 million people, and in 2023 Worlds' final match was streamed to 6.4 million concurrent viewers. Meanwhile, the most popular tournament Forza Motorsport ever had was the Forza Racing World Championship in 2018, and it had a peak of just over 15,500 concurrent viewers. According to this tracker, Forza Motorsport Esports' all-time prize pool was just $770,000. That's all the money that has been awarded to Forza Esports players. Ever. It sounds impressive, but in 2020, just the League's Worlds had a prize pool of $2,225,000, and Call of Duty League Championship had a prize pool of $4.6 million. Those are the prize pools for one event. That's right, one event. One. And that's during the sharp decline from previous year caused by COVID lockdowns, which impacted games like League or Call of Duty significantly more than they impacted racers. So the entire Forza's esports all-time prize pool was multiple times lower than just one event from established esports titles. Vague games get a bunch of cross-promotions, comic tie-ins, official and fan-fiction movie projects, merchandise like hats, hoodies, cups, phone cases, mouse pads, and other accessories. Racing games get almost none of that. Sure, there is the odd project or tournament every now and again that has some connection to established racing franchises, but those are few and far between. And even on the very, very rare occasion when the project is actually good, it still fails to build any hype. Even the biggest and best-funded racing game tournaments are far more famous for all the technical glitches and bugs that happen during the actual event than for the players participating in them or for the games themselves. None of that is helping the racing market. I mean, just look at Steam charts. Out of the top 100 most played games, the first riding game appears only at number 53, with a minuscule fraction of players that the most played games get, and even then it's The Crew 2, a game that recently has been on sale with 99% discount, hence the player numbers. The first racing game with actually consistent player base appears at number 61, and it's the Euro Truck Simulator 2. And it's a truck driving simulator game. It's not even a real racer. The only other driving game in the entire top 100 is BeamNG Drive. And sure, BeamNG Drive is a racing game, but it's a very, very niche racer. More of an advanced physics simulator that just happens to feature the ability to drive a car than an actual proper racer. Even games like Forza Horizon, which is one of the best-selling and most popular racing game franchises in recent memory, only gets played by a minuscule amount of players, and even the all-time peak numbers for the most popular Forza game, the Forza Horizon 4, are dwarfed by daily active players in any of the top 10 games even now during the dead of night in Central Europe on a regular, non-tournament day. So what the hell happened? And how do we get here? Where's the racing game rush from 2000s? Back then, it was pure chaos. Every day, new concepts, ideas, and franchises would be developed, marketed, released, and either crashed and burned or became cult classics. Titles like Ridge Racer, Burnout, Midnight Club, Trackmania, Flat Out, Gran Turismo, Juiced, Project Gotham Racing, and Street Racing Syndicate all had their 5 minutes of glory. Some titles eventually found their audience and grew fan clubs that endured for decades. Some died out right then and there. Some bled out after release of multiple sequels that tarnished their reputation. And yet some were tossed around between various developers that tried to milk them for every drop of value they could, most of the time ending up with complete franchise destruction. And while some of these names are still around in one way or another, these days there's very few franchises that started in 2000s that still maintain some sort of mainstream presence. And there's basically just one that's popular enough that your average gamer would recognize it. That's right, we're finally getting to Need for Speed. 30 years since release, Need for Speed is pretty much the only arcade racing franchise that's still kicking. However, there's much to be said about NFS and its position as the front of racing video games. The last few games, despite selling somewhat well, received at best mediocre ratings from players, with none of them having any staying power past a few years of release. And while NFS games almost never received stellar ratings from critics, with the players even during the peak NFS age, latest games really felt like a sharp decline in all things that made NFS as popular as it had been previously. The franchise in general has been called dead or dying multiple times, with numerous fans claiming NFS has been in downfall for over a decade now, with every new entry being worse than the last, and the franchise still coasting on the good faith and fan community it developed over 15 years ago. Some even go as far as to claim the real Need for Speed ended in 2010 with Hot Pursuit or in 2011 with Shift 2, with every other new entry being little more than a yearly cash grab for EA. Regardless if that is true or not, it's undeniable these days the Need for Speed franchise is far away from the prestige and popularity it enjoyed for many, many years. But in 2000s, this reality was decades away. In fact, during that time Need for Speed was red hot and seemingly unstoppable. So what happened? It all starts with EA, Electronic Arts. These days the studio is known primarily for its corporate greed, complete lack of self-awareness, questionable ethics and moments of incredible cringe, with literally every decision made with the explicit intention of generating as much money as possible for their shareholders and bosses. But modern Electronic Arts is a different beast from what it was during 2000s. Of course, the signs of internal rot and corruption had already appeared by then, ranging from a string of multiple studio acquisitions that incorporated and then destroyed some of the most beloved developers of critically acclaimed titles, to toxic work culture and complete disregard towards their own employees. 2000s Electronic Arts were similar to ancient empires like Egypt, except where Egyptians were throwing blood, pain, and suffering of slaves to build their pyramids and cities. The corporation was been throwing pain and suffering of overworked and underpaid employees. Reports of 100-hour-long work weeks with no days off and incredibly intense crunch times have been coming out for some time, and several class action lawsuits have been filed against EA by its own employees and their significant others as early as the start of 2000s, citing extreme work conditions, unpaid overtime, and toxic work culture. People like EA spouse have become almost legendary in their efforts to bring EA's problems to public attention, and the amount of skeletons EA had to hide in its closet in the years before and since could fill a city-sized graveyard. This problem might have been at least partially alleviated in modern times, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, work at Electronic Arts was absolutely brutal. Back then, EA had yearly releases for the majority of its most popular titles, and in between flagship games, it was either developing or publishing multiple new IPs. And the more games EA released, the more intense the schedule and crunch became. In 2001 alone, EA released 109 games. And sure, some of those games weren't directly developed by EA, but by other studios, and some of the games weren't big-budget mainstream releases, but still, every game had a team of programmers, artists, sound engineers, marketing experts, directors, supervisors, and tons of other staff. And sure, EA had and still has thousands of employees, but even then, the workloads were immense and crunch time was always present. While these days yearly releases are seen in largely negative light, back then it was a perfectly normal and expected behavior in the gaming market, especially from the largest companies like EA. Of course, sacrifices had to be made, constantly increasing workloads, ever-present crunch time, as well as more and more broken marriages, especially nearing game launch dates was becoming a real, Massive problem both for EA and for the people slaving away in the game development mines, so EA bosses could gift themselves tens of millions of dollars in yearly bonus checks. But amidst the absolute flood of broken, cash-grabby, or just underdeveloped titles, an increasingly corporate and greedy ecosystem, and workplace environment dominated by crunch and depression, one time, EA managed to luck out. For one title, the stars aligned and everything clicked into place just right. Months and years of effort, crunch, missed family dinners, divorces, and diminished lifespans resulted in one game. One title that almost immediately became a cult classic and is widely regarded as the best arcade driver ever. Yes, Need for Speed, Most Wanted. Almost 20 years since release, it's still considered by many to be the best Need for Speed franchise has to offer. It's so old, some people that worked on it have passed away years ago, and yet their greatest racing achievement still endures. However, the Most Wanted we got was not the same game that started development all those years ago. Before Most Wanted, Need for Speed was going strong with yearly releases for quite some time. However, for the most part, it was a simple franchise about simple games where players would be driving simple cars. While most of the installments usually sold decently well to warrant sequels, and some of the games even received significant praise, like Porsche Unleashed, it was Underground that would become the first true success for the franchise. Sales numbers for old games are harder to find, but before Underground, the best-selling Need for Speed game was Hot Pursuit, selling 1.7 million copies. And while today these numbers seem low, back then it was the biggest success Need for Speed had ever seen. But Underground changed that. Released in 2003 and selling 15 million units, it's to this day is one of the best-selling Need for Speed games ever. It was stupendously more successful than anyone could ever hope and introduced a lot more people to Need for Speed than any of the previous games ever has. Lots of new features, significantly improved visuals, and much more interesting gameplay all contributed to its success. But the biggest opportunity for NFS came in 2001, with the Fast and Furious franchise, which had its first cinematic release in that year and was an unexpectedly monumental hit with audiences worldwide, bringing more attention to car and tuner culture than ever before. in turn boosting public's interest in all things racing, including Need for Speed. That's not to say Underground owes all of its success purely to Fast and Furious, but without it, even with all the other redeeming qualities, it would have never got as popular as it eventually did. However, during Underground's development, the concept for Most Wanted already existed along with some other projects. It's unclear what Most Wanted was supposed to be at that time. Some leaked artwork suggests it would have been similar to Hot Pursuit, but Underground's success changed all of that. What could have been just another cop chase game turned into a hybrid between Underground's tuner mechanics and Hot Pursuit's police chases. After significantly lower but still massive success of Underground 2, it was decided to incorporate its main feature, open world with ability to free roam, into Most Wanted, and the result was a game that felt like a complete departure from the established franchise, and despite being more of a hybrid of previous ideas than a completely new concept. Most Wanted would receive the best reception the franchise had ever seen, and would come to define Need for Speed as the premier arcade racing game series for years to come. Of course, EA being EA, development of Most Wanted was anything but easy, even if it was based on already established ideas. Constant staff shuffling from project to project, tight deadlines, and EA's decision to develop for basically all platforms at once meant so much stuff was either changed or cut entirely from Most Wanted. You can make a whole another game with all that, or maybe even two. Blacklist was shuffled around significantly, with both Mia and Rog appearing as defeatable opponents on the Blacklist at one point in time or another. Other bosses' cars and territory were changed around. Some bosses were added or cut from the Blacklist entirely. Vehicle list was significantly adjusted, with dozens of vehicles removed from the game entirely, either because of licensing issues or time constraints. Brands like Ferrari, Pagani, Mini, and Chrysler were completely removed, with brands like Nissan removed, but later re-added with updates or fan patches. Even the city of Rockport itself, something that was established quite early in game's development, at one point was changed significantly, with multiple areas removed or restricted. Same applies to events, routes, and game modes, with a significant amount of routes completely inaccessible in the final game and quite a few game modes gone. Police milestones were cut drastically, whereas the finished game had 8, during development there were at least 24. Of course, an argument can be made that a lot of this content was cut in order to make the game simpler, more approachable to casual gamers, and easier to learn. But there's no hiding the fact the biggest contributing factors that resulted in so many redesigns was lack of time, money, and manpower, and the rush to release Most Wanted before Christmas season of 2005. In the end, what we got was a departure from the series. A story-focused racing game with a few dozen cars, tuning, and significant emphasis on police chases during daytime in a big, open world. It does improve upon aspects of gameplay borrowed from previous games, and manages to keep them decently well-balanced for the most part, but not everywhere. The biggest driving force behind progress, the game's story, leaves a lot to be desired. During the prologue, the player is shown entering Rockport City and is almost immediately met by Mia. It's unclear who she is, whether she's a love interest, an old associate, or just some random race driver that just so happens to roll by. Anyway, the protagonist briefly races her in the streets, before getting stopped by Sergeant Cross. Cross is probably the most interesting character in the game, despite only being in it for a few brief moments. He's funny in a cheesy kind of way, and it's clear the actor is having quite a bit of fun playing the character. Sadly, this cutscene is basically all the character development Cross ever gets. He and his partner attempt to arrest the player, but are called away to help with an ongoing pursuit, so Cross scratches the player's car and leaves. This brief interaction is some premium cheese, and Cross at least feels like a genuine tough guy in a position of power, so there's at least some character trait to remember. Following that, the player is shown racing locals, specifically Ronnie. He's easily the most goofy, yet the most memorable character in the game, even if his character development consists of like 10 seconds of cutscenes and maybe 5 phrases total. It's just clear he's having an absolute blast trying to look cool, but ends up being charmingly stupid. He's like a golden retriever in human form. And that's in stark contrast to Razor, the local crew leader, who's one of them cool dudes that hit the jukebox and it turns on. He's built as this threatening figure, a leader to Ronnie, Sato, and a few other local nobodies. But in reality, Razor is barely even a character in the game, and he's so underdeveloped, it's probably unfair to even call him an antagonist. He's just another name on the list, a generic bad guy created with the sole purpose of giving the player something to work towards and to give the game an actual final boss. Anyway, some unimportant stuff happens and a race is set up between Razor and the player. Some shenanigans follow, and the player loses the race due to an oil leak. Ronnie implies the car was sabotaged, and later we learn it indeed was by Razor himself. Although it's never actually shown or explained how he managed to do it. So who knows, maybe Razor is just some Jedi recluse and can break stuff with his mind alone. You can't prove he isn't. So anyway, the player loses the race and the car. In addition to that, police show up and Cross himself arrests the player. However, shortly after that player is released due to lack of evidence, and Mia picks him up, revealing Razor sabotaged the car and is now using it to dominate the blacklist, and sets the player up with a warehouse and a starter car. And that's the story. This is what fuels the game from the start for the next 15 or so hours. Personally to me, it's not even close to interesting or engaging. Sure, it's an arcade racer where the main goal is to drive fast cars on wide roads and win races, but I can't help but think the story could have been significantly better with quite minimal effort. It's clear EA and Black Box tried to do something interesting with the storyline, writing in a few unexpected turns and creating lots of characters. But to put it mildly, the story is flawed. At the core of it is fall from grace and the rise back up to the top, but that's essentially it. Story has almost no meaning to the actual gameplay, and only exists to give a reason to race. Most of the characters introduced in cutscenes have literally no presence in the game, with only ones that interact with the player in any way at all being Raj, Ronnie, Mia, and Razor. They're the ones sending messages about all the events and introducing every single other boss, especially Mia, who does like 70% of communication. Well, I guess technically Cross could count as having presence in the game too, as he does have few cutscenes to himself, sends a few messages and appears at heat level 5, but that happens basically at the end of the game, so interactions are very limited. In general, characters are also mid, the only saving grace being the actors obviously having fun with the roles they play, and coming off as charmingly goofy without being cringe, like it is with games like NFS 2015. Nobody is spewing outrageous garbage. There's no racism, bigotry, or modern nonsense involved. Everyone says exactly what you'd expect their characters to say, and they make it believable. Voice acting is also stellar.
Bolt on or not, that ride is hot.
She's mine now, and I'm gonna ride her like you never could. Hard and flat out.
I want every single unit after the guy.
Everyone?
Everyone!
You can tell the actors are really putting effort into their roles. All of them sound genuine and sincere, almost as if they're actual characters in real life, not just a bunch of polygons in front of a green screen in a video game. So at least there's that. Again, it's just a shame the game doesn't do anything with it and all the characters are given only very limited screen time. But enough about that. Let's race. Racing is fun.
Sammy, you are wrecking the car! Shut up!
Okay, Kimi, we have now a 5-second time penalty that we will serve after the race.
For what?
So that will add 5 seconds to your time after.
For what?
Racing in Most Wanted is often fun, sometimes boring, sometimes completely insufferable. For the most part, it's awesome, Most of the cars are relatively easy to control, have unbelievable levels of downforce, and are so heavy they probably generate their own gravity, so causing chaos and frenzy upon smashing into something is no issue. Complete lack of damage model actually encourages rough play, which your opponents and even bosses never shy away from. Sure, it could be explained by lack of sophistication in AI department, but sometimes when you're working hard trying to win the race, only to get pushed into a wall by a damn bot, it infuriates as much as a crash caused by real person would. Seriously, sometimes races are complete and utter chaos, and it's highly advised for you to smash into enemies yourself. All the conditions for that are there. Push them into walls and obstacles, use traffic to your advantage, and Speed Breaker specifically is basically designed for quick and heavy smash action. Some races feature extremely narrow sections or ultra-sharp turns, and these are prime locations to smash into your enemies or brake check cars driving behind you. There's no penalty for contact, it's all just good fun and makes the game significantly easier at times. But let's talk about the real superstars of Most Wanted, the cars. They're freaking awesome. Most Wanted features everything from peasant-level Grandmobiles to bleeding-edge hypercars that most people only see in dreams, and everything in between. It doesn't look too impressive now, considering how many cars have been released in the last 20 years, but back in 2005, the collection on offer was really damn impressive. Every car is unique. Every car is different weight, speed, grip, handling. All cars feel different, and in such an old game on what is likely very archaic and basic physics engine. That's beyond impressive. Some cars are better for certain tasks than others. Some drive faster, some smash heavier. With some you can cheese the game, but there's something they all share. Majority of cars are fun enough to where their disadvantages can be overlooked, and in those rare cases where cars' problems are too big to ignore, there's a tuning system that allows basically endless customizability to any car, as long as you've got the required parts. In the worst case scenario, you can simply use a different car, and Most Wanted has plenty of them to offer. There is no situation in the game that doesn't have a car or tune setup that can handle it. But the handling model is deceptively in-depth, even beyond options offered by customization. At first glance, it might look like all cars drive and feel similar, but there's a massive difference between front, rear, or all-wheel drive cars, and between light or heavy cars. The fastest and most maneuverable cars like Lotus Elise are great for races, have crazy amounts of grip, can turn at what feels like 50G, it can take on any corner in the game, but are absolutely garbage at taking any punishment at all. So if you drive such a vehicle, both AI, opponents, and police will play pinball with your car. Heavy stuff like Dodge Viper is great for ramming the police and can send their cars flying merely by touching them is fast enough to escape a chase and inflict massive amounts of punishment on everyone, but loses grip and overspins if you quarter just even tiny bit too hard, and stuff like Golf doesn't excel in anything, but is good enough for basically everything, to the point where it's often considered the best car for majority of the game, is used in basically all speed runs and most efficient routes, and in some cases can even be used as a solo car to beat the entire game. The biggest problem is that the game literally never tells you any of this. In your car selection or in the shop, car stats are reduced to top speed, acceleration, and handling bars. It's implied higher stats mean better car, but it only applied to base, unmodded cars, and even in the stats are as vague as possible, especially the handling. It's completely unclear what the stat is based on, and it's literally never explained. There's no mention of understeer, oversteer, weight, traction, or any other actually important metric. The only ways to experience the cars are to actually spend money to buy them, which usually isn't an option as money is pretty scarce for like 70% of the game, or to go in a quick race mode and test there, but it's debatable how much can you experience a car in a few minutes of driving at a time. But besides the lack of information, the handling is really good. The amount of control you've got at any given time is just enough to feel assured in your actions and know exactly how and when your car is going to behave, but not enough to feel artificial and forced. There are no driving aids, cruise controls, distance sensors, lane assists, or auto drives. All of the input is funneled directly to you, and the insanely heavy cars really make you work for every maneuver. With only a few exceptions, all cars take effort to drive well. High mass and stupendous amount of inertia make every turn a battle, usually between lack of grip and understeer. In this game, driving a car is not just clicking a button, it's actual work, and as a result of that, you really become accustomed to your car's strengths, weaknesses, and handling. It's nowhere near the simulation level of immersion, but for an arcade racer, this system feels incredibly deep. One of the greatest advantages of the handling model is the sheer feeling of speed and power. Most of the cars are fast, and Rockport has been designed with enough straight lines to actually feel that speed. Combined with visuals, the uncompromising controls, banging soundtrack, and constant weaving between traffic, the feeling of speed is absolutely incredible. You can really feel the difference between driving at pedestrian 100 miles an hour and 300, when every bump or slowdown feels almost like a stop, and every time you brake to turn and then slam the accelerator and nitrous at the same time to rocket out of said turn, you can almost feel the G-forces pushing you back into your chair. And during those few moments when your car has perfect grip, you're driving at like 250 kilometers per hour, dodging oncoming traffic perfectly without loss of control, with all your focusing directed avoiding crashes and scrapes, never touching the wall, and your car instantly responds to your every input. You truly feel like a driving god. Combine that with a banging soundtrack rocking in the background of your mind, and the whole experience becomes less of a gameplay and more of a trance state. During regular races or free roam, this is easily the best handling model in any Need for Speed game release since 2000. But as good as the handling is, it isn't flawless. Because of the massive amount of traction and insane weight of the cars, controlled drifting is nearly impossible. You do a lot of sliding, but it's almost never your decision. It's just the result of a drag strip levels of grip giving in to astronomical weight of the cars and either understeer or oversteer. It's especially noticeable in Speed Breaker, as the car gets all the control, but the second car loses even a tiny bit of grip, all of it might as well just be gone. So you can easily force a sideways slide if you enter Speed Breaker, but you will almost never be able to control it. Even if you somehow manage to screw up your tuning and give the car the least amount of traction possible, you can only do Hollywood movie slides if you speed brake around the corners or just happen to drive on a bit of grass or dirt, as that also destroys any traction the car has. Of course, considering there's only like 2 tracks in the entire game that feature a significant amount of dirt, grass, or off-road driving, the inability to drift is a very minor problem. In the worst case scenario, Speed Breaker Slow-Mo is there to help, since Speed Breaker gives so much power to steering. Combined with massively increased weight of already heavy cars, it nearly always sends your car into a slide, but Most Wanted is not Tokyo Drift, and you will never experience that level of cinematic sideways movement. None of these rules apply to AI opponents though. In Most Wanted, AI drives poorly only when you're looking at them, and even then only sometimes. When opponent cars aren't in your field of vision, 99% of time, they take perfect racing lines at maximum speed, don't care about physics, and can take almost every corner with unlimited grip and experience infinite G-forces. Sure, there is the occasional blunder when an opponent spins out and gets wrecked, but those are few and far between. Most of the time, opponent will just rubber band at the speed of light. Rubber band in Most Wanted is legendarily strong. Seriously, you can drive the most expensive hypercar with all of the best mods at maximum velocity, and still some schmuck with baseline Fiat Punto with a spoiler will be able to catch up to you when rubber band kicks in. It doesn't care about speed limits, physics, or actual capabilities of the car. In fact, past like Blacklist number 12 or so, in basically every race you will always drive the worst car, regardless of what your car actually is and how you've modded it. And no point will it be faster than the AI opponent's cars. Rubber band is just so omnipotent and omnipresent. At least rubber band isn't active all the time, only most of the time, and those are exactly the times when you notice it. Obviously, it's there to prevent the player from becoming all-powerful and making the game too easy. But when you're half a race ahead of your opponents, There's like 300 meters left to the finish line, and suddenly all of them manage not only to catch up to you, but also to beat you at the last moment after suddenly driving at the speed of light for a couple of seconds and ignoring all obstacles and corners. It's infuriating to say the least. It's manageable in boss races since you're dealing with only one opponent and you can smash into them, block them, or just force them to crash, but in regular races with multiple opponents, you simply can't block everyone. So ironically, boss races are usually easier than the races needed to unlock said bosses, all because of that damn rubber band. And it's nothing new. There are forum posts complaining about this very issue going back to basically the release of the game. That's how notorious and absolutely insane the rubber banding is. The only saving grace is that enemy cars can also crash into oncoming traffic, get spun out, or just glitch into a wall. It happens often enough that it's sort of expected, but not enough to be relied on, and even when that happens, it makes the victory seem kind of hollow. But at least they're also susceptible to pursuit breakers, so sometimes you can use that to slow them down. But if you want to be legit, the only real way of beating rubber band is to drive absolutely perfectly, take perfect lines, corner with perfect accuracy, time nitrous at the best moments, and never lose grip. You have to actively try to improve your skill at driving to win. It's sort of fun at first because the game actually challenges your skills a bit and you've got to improve as a driver and can't just luck your way around all the time, but eventually enemies become so fast, you actually have to work to beat them. It's especially noticeable in the second part of the game. After beating the blacklist number 6 or so, enemies become incredibly hard, and races usually take place on longer routes, so the game gets significantly harder. While early races could be beat with no effort even with weaker car, late game to relaxed arcade driving experience get closer to some simulator games. But that's not even close to the worst part of the game, because in Most Wanted, drag events exist, and they're pure nightmare. In these events, all your focus is directed at shifting gears. With the car auto steering, in theory it's meant to hold you in lane. The problem is, auto steering is horrible. It's incredibly inaccurate, but more importantly, it's extremely powerful. Even if you attempt to steer into a different lane, you rarely can. During drag events, you've got maybe 10% of regular steering power. The rest is all auto steer. And forget about executing sudden turns or lane changes to avoid obstacles, like the intentionally forced spawning traffic. That's just never happening, period. You will always be driving only where auto steering guides you and never anywhere else. And what's even worse than the absolute dictatorship of the auto steering is that it's not even constant power. Sometimes it's so powerful your inputs are basically ignored. Other times you can almost feel like you're gaining control. It's not consistent, and you never know what outcome you'll get if you try to turn. The only real way to cheese the system is to use Speed Breaker, since that gives you all the control back, but that introduces its own issues with actually too much control. The steering becomes too strong, and your car just sliding away into nearby wall. So it's either no control or too much control with no middle. It wouldn't be too bad if drag event tracks were straight, with no corners and no traffic, but the game intentionally spawns traffic just to twist the knife an already painful wound. And while in regular races, you can commit literal genocide and smash into everyone you meet with no repercussions, during drag events, if you even look at an obstacle wrong, your car is totaled and you've got to restart the race. With this control scheme, drag races turn into rinse and repeat events, going through the race once, memorizing which direction oncoming traffic is coming from, and trying to avoid it on the next run. You either succeed or repeat again until you succeed. The only good thing about drag events is the ability to push your enemies around into walls or obstacles, but even that option is only viable in boss races, where there's only one opponent. Or if you're really lucky, the opponents will crash and total their car, giving you a free win. Otherwise, you're completely screwed, and doomed to repeat the same events over and over again until a miracle happens. Oh, and rubber band also works in drag events too. So it's never as easy as just driving well. It's like being stuck in a Groundhog Day, just with zero fun and endless annoyance. While these days some remember drag events fondly, actually playing them is a complete and utter slog, and is closer to insanity than actual enjoyable gameplay, with you forced to repeat the same race over and over and over again, hoping for a miracle. But even with all my crazy rambling about them, the drag events are not as big of an issue as it might seem. Progression in Most Wanted is pretty simple. Win certain amount of races, get certain amount of bounty, complete certain milestones, then go beat the boss. Repeat until you've defeated all of them, get the ending cutscene. There's no deviation from the formula, it's always the same, the only difference being the amount of bounty you must have and the amount of races or milestones you need to complete to unlock the next boss. It's a simple and pretty boring system, but at the same time it offers certain perks. Most bosses only require a few races to be complete, and very few require all. So most of the time, the most annoying races or events that you don't want to do, like drag races, can be skipped entirely. You'll still encounter drag races a few times, since a couple bosses have them as their mandatory boss event. But if you don't want to do them, most of the time you are forced to. What you can't skip is the police and bounty system. Every boss requires a certain amount of bounty, and the only way to get it is to participate in the police chases. This is the crux of Most Wanted, the entire purpose for the game's entire existence, and is easily the most important element of gameplay. Police is what made Most Wanted what it is, and it's the main reason why people remember the game. Most of the police chases are intense and exhilarating, with success or failure dependent almost entirely on the car you use, your knowledge of the map, and pure driving skill. There's a huge difference in difficulty depending on whether you drive a light car or a heavy car, all-wheel drive or not, acceleration, top speed, even your ability to take optimal corners and the grip of tires onto the ground comes into play when chased by the police. It's an excellent system. Combined with milestones, infractions, pursuit breakers, and a variety of police vehicles, it's easily the greatest police system in any Need for Speed game. But it does have problems. The first one is heat levels. Police response is directly tied to the heat level of your car, but heat levels are hilariously unbalanced. First of all, heat builds up way too slow. It takes like 10 minutes of pure police chase to get from heat level 1 to level 2, and roughly the same to get from level 2 to level 3. But why is that a problem, I hear you asking? Well, the first two heat levels are a joke. They're incredibly boring, easy, and feel more like a waste of time rather than actual challenge. Police are incredibly weak and unaggressive. There's only a few police cars, and they barely even try to get you. There's absolute zero challenge. It takes significantly more effort to have a police chase last 10 minutes than to escape immediately. In fact, most of the time at level 1 or level 2 heat, you will both enter a chase during a race and just randomly manage to escape the police by simply driving the route without any actual effort on your part. Or police cars will just decide not to follow you at all, forcing you to enter a cooldown and escape. And that's during races. If you're actively trying to build up heat or complete milestones, you want to get into actual chases. But laziness and scarcity of the police during first two levels, combined with complete brain-dead AI, means that not only will you be escaping the chase like all the time, you'll actually be wasting time trying to find another police unit to break the cooldown and continue the chase. Police car might follow you, it might wander off, it might hit a pursuit breaker and wreck itself. At low heat levels, you're not sweating because police are scary. You're sweating because you're scared for these little baby men police and what they might do to themselves, since their every action basically screws you over. And backup takes ages to show up. At level 1, it's 3 minutes, and at heat level 2, it's 2 minutes. In a game where chases sometimes last tens of seconds at most, it's hilariously bad. I mean, check this out. Few bosses in the game require you to complete a quick escape milestone. Basically escape the chase in very limited time. One challenge early on might require you to escape in 4 minutes or less. A later one might require you to escape in 2. Even without trying hard, I've managed to complete all such challenges in roughly 30 seconds. It's laughable how easy it is to lose the police at low heat. Heat system hurts even more because bounty buildup is also directly related to heat levels. The higher the heat level, the more bounty you gain over time. So there's incentive to get heat level as high as possible as fast as you can, as the game requires you to build up bounty to progress. You get bounty for wrecking police cars and over time as the chase goes on. But the amount of bounty you get for chase time is completely pitiful, and scarcity of police cars during low heat makes bounty farming by smashing police a counterproductive affair. Like, at level 5 heat, you might make more bounty in a minute than you could during half an hour chase at level 1 or 2. That's how large the difference is. And not only is police a complete joke at low heat levels, whenever heat level updates, police cars that were chasing you just drive off, forcing you to enter cooldown mode and frantically search for another police car to continue your heat and bounty buildup. In these early hours of gameplay, you actually spend more time looking for the police than being chased by them. Like 60% of the first half of the game is not you racing, but you trying to build up bounty just to progress. Babysitting the police, not driving fast and driving carefully is the only way to progress. And that's exactly the opposite of fun. For God's sake, it's need for speed, not need for obeying the rules. What's even worse is that cars for races and cars for chases are usually different. For a race, you want a light car with high speed and good steering, but such a car would suck in a police chase where you want acceleration, torque, and weight. So you're encouraged to have 2 cars, one for chase and one for races. But since this isn't altered carbon and you can't split your consciousness into 2 bodies, you can only drive one car at any given time, with other cars kept in the garage. The problem is, heat only rises on whichever car you're currently driving and falls on all the cars currently parked in the garage. So even if you get to decent heat level on a Viper, then switch to Lumbo for racing, by the time you're done winning all required races for the boss and are ready to engage in a chase for bounty, your Viper will be down to heat level 2 or even 1, and you'll have to waste time building up the heat level all over again. Not only does this make the first 15 to 20 minutes of any decent chase feel boring and unfulfilling, but it also ruins the usual high-octane intense flow of the game. There's a reason why the bus station in Most Wanted became a holy place in Most Wanted community. If you park your car on the roof of the pavilion, you can just go away and get yourself lunch, tea, or even catch up on a show or something. Unless a cop somehow wanders onto the pavilion, which is a rare occurrence, you could just let the heat build up without spending any time actually driving in this fiesta of boredom. Just come back when heat reaches decent level, and you can have all the fun in the world without having to develop crippling depression while looking for stupid idiots pretending to be police officers. It's easily one of the best exploits ever found in Most Wanted, and it makes the game significantly more enjoyable, especially in those early hours of gameplay, where police is at its stupidest and chases are at their most boring. Heat system is locked behind the blacklist, and as you beat stronger bosses and climb higher and higher up the blacklist, heat system improves massively. Not only is heat build up really slow early game, but the heat is only limited to level 2, so you're forced to play in the worst and most boring conditions. But with beating bosses, more and more heat levels unlock, and heat builds up more and more rapidly. While it takes 10 minutes to go from heat level 1 to heat level 2 at the start of the game, after beating Blacklist 5 or 4, getting to level 2 takes 1 minute or less. It's definitely a massive improvement and accelerates the game significantly, but most importantly, it makes the game much more interesting, since you can skip the boring heat levels much more quickly. Because at the core of it, the police system only becomes really good at heat level 3. Dumb cops of level 1 and 2 are replaced by police units that feel like they've got actual AI intelligence, even if primitive. Police units become much more aggressive, using pit maneuvers and constantly attempting to block you in or ram you into a wall. Rhino SUVs also appear and just bash your brains in head-on collisions, which is always fun. Every pursuit breaker becomes your best friend, and every stop or bad corner makes you sweat. It's awesome. Heat level 3 and 4 are where Most Wanted is at its peak. Action is heavy enough to keep you entertained all the time, but not so heavy you don't have time to breathe. You and cops are on the same relative level of power, with them being completely able to stop you, but you are also a human wrecking ball and can take hordes of them every race. Bounty builds up rapidly. There's an actual challenge. Your knowledge of the map, shortcuts, and pursuit breakers is tested, and every time you get busted due to your mistakes or physics, you curse out because you've lost tons of progress in bounty, but you could just get into another chase and get it all back in minutes, this time maybe escaping. Your choice of car to be used in the chase is absolutely critical. Take something too light, and it will be tossed like a ragdoll, with Rhino SUVs crashing straight through you and getting stopped dead by every roadblock. Take something too heavy, and you can crash through everything yourself, especially if using the speed breaker, but you won't have the speed to escape light units and the helicopter, so ending the chase when you want might be hard. It's a great dynamic where everything depends on your choices and skills, and you can make the chase as easy as hard as you want. Massive bounty boosts from destroying cop cars, helicopters, spike strips, constant roadblocks, onslaught of Rhino SUVs, and constant pressure to move really spike your adrenaline. And the ever-rising bounty just adds to the pressure. Overall, it's an excellent system, and easily the best police integration in any Need for Speed game ever. It just feels so right, and adds a lot of enjoyment to overall gameplay. Heat Level 5 is where Cross and his special Corvette police force come out to play. That's where shit really hits the fan, but if you're already dealing with Heat Level 4, it's not that much of a problem, just escaping is way harder and enemies are way faster and stronger. Cross himself is a complete joke. He's programmed to not put any pressure on you, but it's his Corvette squad that can become a nightmare. They're fast, and there's many of them. That's where you build the most bounty and have the strongest opposition, with all the strongest units using all the tactics just to stop you. At this point, you've got pretty much the best cars in the game, and every chase happens at ultra high speeds with incredibly high stakes in case of losing. Combined with the insane level of speed, the peak of your driving skill, and just non-stop carnival of chaos and destruction, this game transcends the bounds of mere arcade racer. It becomes almost like an acid trip to nirvana of absolute insanity. This is why Most Wanted is remembered so fondly. This right here, the peak of police power in Need for Speed history, the absolute best of the best, the strongest, fastest, most powerful, and most enjoyable to destroy enemies in the history of arcade racing games. Near perfect balance of speed, challenge worthy of your skills, and just the sheer intensity of action of the gameplay just blend together into pure trance-like state of euphoria. It's right here where all the shortcomings and flaws of the game fade away into nothingness, leaving only the sheer joy. It's unparalleled and completely incredible. Truly the greatest experience in arcade driving history. Visually, Most Wanted is a mixed bag. On one hand, it's still a great-looking game, with reflections and sun effects especially deserving all the praise. Seriously, sun in Most Wanted is epic beyond belief, blinding when you look straight at it, with rays reflecting off of the road, scattering in the atmosphere and turning the whole world into a picturesque paradise of speed. Everything else also looks great, with trees and forests especially looking amazing when you drive through them. Roads, surface, and especially cars are detailed. Nice to look at, and they somewhat hold up even to this day. And man, rain effects are incredible. It's like the simplest effect you can make, with a visual layer of drops just appearing on your screen whenever it rains. But it's incredibly satisfying to look at and gives the whole world a real feeling of wetness and moisture. Reflections on the wet road, raindrops on your screen, the world looking cold and uninviting. It's incredibly cool and satisfying to look at. But all of that only applies when you're moving fast. If you're still, Most Wanted is really nothing special. The very second your focus shifts from driving to environment, you immediately notice how flat and uninteresting everything is. Washed out, low-resolution buildings, angled road lines, the same repeated texture on every square foot of grass and dirt, completely two-dimensional bushes, and some trees being flatter than a pancake. Road traffic cars are made out of like 4 polygons with all sharp angles. Same applies to all non-interactable structures. Colors are all muted and boring. And most importantly, the entire palette is brown. Brown skies, brown roads, brown trees, brown everything. Entire game runs through this brown Instagram filter, with the only difference being the shade of brown. For whatever reason, back in like 2005, 2006, and 2007, this brown filter was everywhere. Almost every 7th gen game had it. And while Most Wanted is still not as puke-inducing as games like Resident Evil 4, Far Cry 2, Gears of War, Resistance, or Unreal Tournament 3, it's still brown to the point of being quite nauseating at times, especially after a longer gaming session. And whenever it's not brown, it's dark green or dark yellow. Aside from custom paint jobs on cars, there are no bright or vibrant colors in Most Wanted. There isn't any variety or identity colors. Brown theme is the only theme for everything everywhere. In terms of color, every place looks like every other place. Time of day is only determined by the intensity of this brown filter, with mornings or evenings being significantly more intense and thus darker than broad daylight. It's an incredibly boring color scheme, combined with the fact you have to replay some races multiple times and the boredom caused by that. Most Wanted at times is incredibly tiring. Seriously, if you turn the music off, you can easily fall asleep during certain races, as your brain will just shut down from all the brown overload. It gives Most Wanted a signature look, but that look is definitely not a good one, which is double as sad because if you remove the color filter, Most Wanted actually looks pretty cool. Disabling the brown filter with a mod or settings file edit brings back significantly more vibrancy to the world. It doesn't become super beautiful or anything, but it does feel much more natural and stupendously more alive. The game even looks newer than it actually is, like it got a second wind or something. Sure, it's a matter of taste, but I'd say removing the piss filter is the definitive way to play Most Wanted. While Most Wanted may exhibit imperfections in certain aspects, its audio quality stands out as remarkably close to perfection. Each action has an associated noise, finely tuned to maximize the arcade racing experience. Cars in particular are amazing. While the engine sounds may not precisely mirror their real-life counterparts, they are immensely cool. The Lamborghini Murcielago, in particular, stands out as perhaps the coolest sounding car to ever be featured in a racing game. With its engine emitting a godlike whine. It's so impressive and memorable that whenever I envision a supercar, regardless of brand, I instinctively associate it with that distinct noise. Other vehicles like the Dodge Viper, Lamborghini Gallardo, and even the McLaren SLR evokes similar awe-inspiring auditory experiences. Their engine revs may seem monotonous to some audio purists, but the undeniable impact they have on the visceral sensation of driving cannot be overstated. Music is another strong point for Most Wanted, even if slightly disappointing. Tons of talented artists are featured, such as The Prodigy, Static X, Hyper, Bullet for My Valentine, and most importantly, the man that would one day become Scandroid, the Cell Dweller. Soundtrack is really strong, and most of the songs are great fit for a high-octane arcade racer. But the problem is every band only has like one track, and over a 15 or so hour campaign, you'll be hearing those tracks over and over and over again. It really gets pretty boring pretty fast, even if the tracks themselves are true bangers. It probably was a licensing problem or something, but Most Wanted really would have benefited from an increased quantity of tracks. Cell Dweller's music, in particular, could have been further utilized to enhance the diversity and intensity of the soundtrack. His style aligns perfectly with the arcade racing genre, and additional tracks from him would undoubtedly have elevated the overall experience. It's somewhat sad that so much greatness could have been achieved with a larger selection of songs, making Most Wanted even more remarkable, but in the end, it fell quite a bit short of absolute stardom. So, after everything, what has made Most Wanted so special to so many people? It's just the best Need for Speed has ever been, even with all the flaws and drawbacks, most of which were limited by the technology of the time, constrained budgets, and limited manpower. Most Wanted is still simply better than every other arcade racer out there. With Most Wanted being around for the better part of 20 years, and a huge amount of gamers literally growing up with it, community support and mod selection is rich and varied. And with the game being so old, you can run it on everything. You probably could get a free computer from eWay Center, install Most Wanted on it, and be completely fine. Varied mod support, basically unlimited customization, and years of data mining mean you can adjust Most Wanted to your needs and play however you want, on whatever you want. Better textures, remastered cutscenes, improved audio, more cars. Whatever you want, there's a mod for that. It's all out there, along with extensive modding guides and years worth of tutorials, tips, hints, exploits, and other good stuff. And you know the best part about it? Most Wanted was abandoned literally years ago, with no further official development done on the game in decades, and has moved to abandonware status, which means you can download, install it, and play for free anytime, any place. You will find a link to download the game in the description. So go out, get it, play it, and experience the best part of Syncade driving history.